to Kat's Novel Adventures. I'm Kat, and I am here with my good friend Jennifer, and we are going to be discussing two awesome stories by Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart and The Black Cat. And tonight is our last night with Edgar Allan Poe. This is going to be the end of the Nevermore Readathon until next year. I don't know about you, Jennifer, but this week flew by, and I almost feel like it wasn't not enough time to spend with Poe. That's not to say you can't read Poe all year long, obviously. So everyone, please meet Jennifer. Jennifer, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Yes, I am Jennifer, but you can call me Jen. My channel is Literary Love 123, and I have recently relaunched my BookTube channel. And I'm still, I say this all the time because I'm a little bit rusty on editing or really don't know much about it. So forgive my poor editing, but I'm going to get there. But what I like to do, or what I want to do on my channel, is to use my master's in English to discuss horror from an academic perspective, but also just to have fun getting to know everyone on BookTube and having fun with discussions. I want to make the academic world a bit more accessible. And I also want to show anyone in academia who may happen to catch my channel that horror is a valid literary genre, and it should not have, it should not get shunned, and they should not turn their nose up at horror.
I 100% agree. And I'm glad you're going to be out there advocating for the horror genre, because really and truly, when you tell people that you read horror, they kind of look at you like, what do you mean you read that? I mean, it's a stepchild of all of the literary genres. They don't consider it like literary. But, anybody who knows anything should know that Edgar Allan Poe is very literary, and he wrote a lot of horror, didn't he not? So we were a couple of minutes late starting this because Jennifer and I were having some static issues, just to let you know. Hopefully you're not hearing any static now. I think I've solved the problem. Apparently, when I have certain guests on, it's not every guest, but when I have certain guests on, static appears. The only other thing I can think is that Edgar Allan Poe is present with us, because this is the second Poe conversation or stream that I'm having that is Poe related. And we had static on sprints, and we had it before we came on. But even though I'm not tech savvy, I'm going to pat myself on the back because I figured it out. So hopefully you can hear us and we don't have any kind of issues this evening. We're very excited to be here. I'm going to acknowledge everyone who has taken their precious time out of their evening to be with us. We want to welcome you here tonight. We have Alicia in the house.
Hey,
hello,
Alicia.
hello. Skeleton Kid. Woo! I'm so glad you're back. So sorry about everything that happened yesterday. Aren't friends. Hello, Lauren. We're all having a Poe-tastic day. I love that. But you know me, I like those Poe puns just as much as you do, Jennifer.
Yes.
Lauren, we solved the static issue. So if you ever come back to be a guest, I have a little sticky note telling myself what to do so I won't forget, because I could forget. And Skeleton Key is giving us some emojis. Hello, M. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, Anita. How are you? Anita is a horror writer. She writes different stories, and she actually has some fairy tales out, some darker fairy tales. So
I need to get my hands on those.
Yeah, so she has a YouTube channel and she promotes, what she's writing. So you can check that out. Queen Victoria, hello, welcome. Tina, how are you? I'm so happy to see so many friendly people in our chats that come to my Wednesday sprints. Thank y'all for coming and supporting us. We have a battle of Poe versus Ant-Man. Yes. Hello, Jackie. Welcome,
Hey.
welcome. Your channel is great, Jen. Listen to
Thank
that.
you.
Yes. And
Thank
you're
you.
only, let's put it this way. It's better for you to start off with a baseline and get better. That's how I
Yes.
kind of feel about it. When I look at my early videos, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't think I was that nervous or that weird, but obviously I was. But
I know.
anyway, I think I'm better. Kat, I just see I missed your call. So sorry. Well, you were supposed to be my tech. You were supposed to be my tech support. I'm like, let me call Kelsey right now. She will help me with tech support. But guess what? I figured it out. You get weirder looks when you write horror. I'm sure. Yes. Because
I'm
I'm sure
sure.
you say, hi, I'm Anita and I write horror. And they're probably like, get away. I read The Telltale Heart yesterday. It was my first story by Poe. I don't plan on it being my last. I like
Woo,
hearing
yeah.
that. Tina. Yes, Tina asked if it was too late to join the readathon yesterday. And I said, absolutely not. Read one story and you got it. And Kelsey's telling us that we sound good. Well, that's because I fixed it. I figured out a way. I can't use that little mic that you gave me when I have certain guests on. No worries. Glad to be back. I'm glad you are back. How is everyone? I'm feeling good. How are you feeling, Jen? Good?
Good. I very good. Thank you, Lauren. I thought red would fit for Poe. I needed the red, right? The blood and all the macabre, elements bringing it in.
Yeah, I almost wore the red, but I went with pink. Sorry,
Pink
I
is
didn't do the red.
beautiful.
But I am wearing my black. Excited to hear you talk about Poe. I listened to 3 Poe stories this week. Awesome. I like hearing that. And I'm so glad you figured it out. So sorry. No, don't be sorry. I figured it out. That's all that matters. And you guys and gals don't have to listen to any static while we talk. Raven earrings too. A wonderful earring moment.
You can
Yeah.
bring them closer. Yeah. They're like the little book. It even has like the stuff on the back. So yeah.
Yeah, those are awesome. Awesome, awesome. So great to see you both together on a live. Yay, Jen. Woo!
It was so nice to talk to Kat. Like I've talked to her so much through sprints and Instagram and chats, but to actually have a interaction with her. We're going to do an in-person thing because Kat and I are not too far from each other. So we're going to get together. We're going to
Yes,
do
we
it.
are. We are. I love being able to interact with people that I talk to either through direct messaging or in the chats or whatever, and we can have a face. I mean, you see each other, you know what each other looks like, but to actually talk, and then it's just natural to me. I don't know. I feel like we've known each other for years and years.
Yeah. Because we're all weird horror people together. So, we gotta stick together.
That's right. I agree 100%. Okay, so we are discussing The Telltale Heart and The Black Cat. Those are 2 post stories. And when Jen and I first talked about stories that we could talk about, I figured Jen would be perfect to have on because she loves Poe. She knows a lot. I think she's a Poe expert. She knows a lot about Poe. She's written about Poe for graduate school. And I said I would really like to start with The Telltale Heart. What do you think would be a good second story that we could, meld with it? And I think I brought something else up. And then you were saying maybe The Black Cat, because there's so many similarities between the two. There are differences, but there are so many similarities. And so I said, yes, let's do that because they're both awesome stories, in my opinion. And I did not listen to them. I thought about trying to listen today to someone narrate it while I was, kind of listening or following along. And I did not do that. So I only rely on myself and how I emphasize and, do the inflections, so it's myself just interpreting everything, nothing. Although I will say, when you listen to somebody read something, sometimes you do interpret things a little bit differently. That happened to me with the poems that I read yesterday. So what do you want to start with, Jennifer? How do we want to open this conversation up?
Well, the first thing that I do want to bring up is the way that we were talking a moment ago too about horror and horror readers, horror writers, and the horror genre. I was reading this article, and I'll try to link that to to on my page or somewhere, but it was from the University of Chicago News, and the article was titled "The Haunting Power of Edgar Allan Poe." And it's written by Tori Lee. And Tori Lee is actually a professor who teaches Poe, all about Poe class. So you don't have to deal with any other stuff. It's all Poe. But something that I found really profound in this article that relates not only to Poe, but to horror in general, is this quote that Poe is willing to confront the terrible and the dramatic head on without flinching from it. He models a way of seeing that resonates beyond his historical moment. And this last line, I feel like, speaks to horror in general. There's an intensity of focus in horror that reveals what is typically hidden or lurking at the margins of thought. And that's one thing I like to talk about when I talk to people about horror, is that horror teaches us so much about the human condition, and it causes us to really be able to confront some of our worst fears or traumatic experiences head on. So that's just kind of something that I like to think about. So, and was there anything you wanted to say, Kat, to that?
Well, I mean, I agree, and I do think that you bringing that up. I know this is fictional, but I was reading this book, The Man Who Was Poe, and towards the end of it, the little boy asks Edgar Allan Poe where he's going to go, and he pretty much says that he doesn't know where he's, going to end up, because people are not ready for his kind of stories. They're kind of frightened. They don't understand it, because he ends up meeting a group of people at, like this tea that he's at. And they're all questioning him, like, why do you write these kind of stories? Where are you pulling this from? Usually it's from the experiences of a writer and all this kind of stuff. And so I do think he was probably ahead of his time when it came to writing a lot of his stories. And because he was willing to tackle subjects like death and fear and mental illness and addictions, that wasn't something that I think the general public was ready to read about, because I don't think either people didn't understand it, what was going on with it, or they didn't want to have to acknowledge that possibly they had those same fears or they had those same issues, so you don't want to read about something that hits a little too close to home, so I thought that's really interesting, that he brought that up in the book, and then you're saying this now. But yeah, I think horror has a place, because we all have some kind of a fear of something, and it allows you to also look at things that are happening in society at the time, and put it in a way that is a little bit, I don't know if horror is easier to digest. Sometimes it is a little bit easier to digest than the actual horror that you experience in real life.
Yes. Yes. It's an escape. That's why my best friend, she doesn't like horror at all. And she doesn't get it, that, it helps me with my anxiety and even with my depression. And I feel like Poe, obviously we know that he dealt with a lot of personal tragedy. He never really knew his biological father, and his mother died when he was very young.
Yeah, I think he was like 3 years old.
Yeah. So he really, you'll see that a lot in his work, that he's missing that mother figure and that father figure, which is something I want to talk about when we get to the Telltale Heart. But his foster father, John Allen, was not very good to Poe. They did not get along at all. So I feel like Poe a lot of times is reflecting that loss in his writing, the loss he felt with his mother, the loss he felt because he didn't really have a father figure. And then his wife, Virginia, which she was his cousin and much younger than him, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. It's problematic for sure, but that could take us all night. But I think it helps us too with the context of the stories we're looking at tonight. He resigned in 1842 from Graham's magazine, so he was kind of trying to find his way. And 1842 was also the year that Virginia, his wife, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. So he's dealing with all of that in 1842. And then in 1843, we get the Telltale Heart and the Black Cat. So I think a lot of what he's writing about is dealing with the loss that he felt, not only of a father figure that he never had, but most definitely with the loss and the illness of Virginia, because he writes about her time and time again.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also too, I think both stories deal with guilt. They deal with guilt. They deal with confessing. They, making a confession. They deal with, having someone taking a closer look at you and examining you. So you just wonder how much of it he feels he's responsible for what happened with Virginia, and I don't know if he ever, even though he did meet other women and dated and was actually even engaged another time, he was actually seeing a woman and then engaged. Like he was liked a woman and then he was engaged to another woman, and then that didn't work out. I'm sorry, my dog keeps coming in and out. He cannot decide what he is doing. There's no ghost in my house. But you just wonder, if he was searching for someone to replace Virginia and never could quite, capture that. Just like you wonder if he was replacing his mom with Virginia, so I do know he did have a close relationship with Virginia's mom, though, who he called Auntie. So, she was like a mother figure for him. But okay, so do we want to talk about the similarities first? Do we want to talk about our narrators? I mean, it's so much to talk about. Like we could talk hours and hours and think about each one. I think the first thing we should address is the fact that both stories have unreliable narrators from the get-go. That is, we have to establish that. I mean, neither one of them is trustworthy because they're both trying to convince us. One's trying to convince us that he's not insane. The other one's trying to convince us that he's not an alcoholic, and they're both trying to question their sanity, but they're also trying to justify why they did the things that they did, why they, committed murder. And I think in the Black Cat, I think it's more horrifying than the Telltale Heart. I mean, murder is terrible regardless, but I just think it's way more horrific in the sense because I don't know. And I don't know what that's supposed to.
He hurt the cat.
Well, he did. He hurt the cat.
In horror, we can be all like,
Well, which I should probably put something on here that we are going to have spoilers. Let me do that really quickly because
you know how we are. A lot of us in horror, we're like, do whatever you want to do to people, but don't hurt the animals. Leave the dog alone. Leave the cat alone.
Let me put this on here. Okay, we are having spoilers. So if you have not read The Black Cat or The Telltale Heart, we are going to talk about it all. Yeah, so, we have these unreliable narrators. They each bring their baggage. Although when you think about it, the narrator in The Black Cat seems like he has it a little bit more together than the narrator in The Telltale Heart. Do you feel the same about that? I mean, I feel like he seemed like he was okay until he touched alcohol. And then once he started drinking alcohol because of whatever was motivating him to do that, he becomes addicted and then he's drinking more and more. That's when he kind of loses control. Whereas the Telltale Heart narrator, I don't know, did he just seem kind of odd from the beginning? I don't know if we just don't have enough backstory on him.
I think we have to, like, with the Telltale Heart, because we don't know the relationship between the narrator and the old man.
Right.
We don't really know. One of the things that I read, that I found very interesting, without getting too Freudian, because I think I talked about this on my, well, my blog, this scholar got very, Sigmund Freud kind of psychoanalysis. But one of the things that I did think was interesting that he brought up was that the old man is the father, and this narrator has been dealing with this overbearing father. And he talks about how at the beginning, the narrator says, I really didn't have anything against him, but I loved him, but I couldn't stand that eye. So he kind of brought out the point that it was this overbearing father who had his eye on the child constantly, or the young person, because it doesn't really seem like it's a child, no. But that he just felt like he had to do something to get away from the eye of his father. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because I'd always thought about it as it was a caregiver to the old man. I thought it was really an interesting way to think about it, thinking about it being a father and son relationship. And that would make it even more disturbing, I think, too. Our daughter, because we really don't know, what gender the narrator is. So it's interesting.
No, that's true. That is true. I just always assumed it was a male because of how he goes about killing the old man. I mean, you would have to be a pretty strong female to do that. I don't even know I could do that myself.
Unless he was old and weak.
Well, I mean, that is a good point. He does love the old man. He's a caregiver, and you kind of think that he's been with this old man for a little bit. It's not like he just started taking care of the old man. And the old man trusts him, because he never questions anything. And I don't know. I feel like the narrator in The Telltale Heart, his issue is mental illness. He is struggling with mental illness, whereas our narrator for The Black Cat is struggling with alcohol addiction. And in some ways, and because of when it was written, the narrator in The Telltale Heart might not necessarily have control over it. And, he's trying to make his case for, people would call me mad for doing this. And he's trying to defend his sanity and all of that. But can he really be held accountable if he is suffering from something like schizophrenia, where he's hallucinating about the eye, or because he had trauma as a child and it manifests and that eye is what triggers him? Whereas in The Black Cat, he's choosing to drink alcohol. He's choosing to have that happen. And he does horrific things, when he is under the influence. So I don't know. It raises an interesting question to me. Not that I think it's okay to murder anybody, but It just brings up the fact that, in one case you've got, because both of them feel guilt, but I think for the Telltale Heart, the guilt is because he truly feels guilty, because he does have a love for the old man. And it is something that's out of his control, because if he is taken over by his mental illness and doesn't really understand what he's done, I mean, you think about, he goes through this whole horrific thing where he hides the body after he's chopped it up and everything. He puts it on the floorboards, and he could have gotten away with it. But he goes back into another moment where he acknowledges the horror of what he's done, and then he confesses. Whereas in The Black Cat, I mean, he confesses, but do you think it's really out of guilt, or just out of the fact that he knows he's going to get caught, and he got caught?
I think in the Black Cat, and the way I see it is, at the beginning, he already tells us, right, that he is going to tell his story because he's going to die tomorrow. So I feel like he's just trying to unburden himself, right? And he's also trying to convince us that it was all of this other outside stuff that caused him to do the things that he did. But I did write my final paper in a class on the black cat. So I talked about in this paper how in the black cat that it's the narrator's own violent manifestations of his unconscious desires rather than the symbolic objects on which he places blame that bring about his eventual execution. Because he tries to blame everything on the wife, the cat,
the alcohol.
Yes, the alcohol. But it's interesting too when we think about also the cat's name being Pluto, because Pluto, of course, is another name for the god of the underworld. And so he's already naming his cat something that's connected to hell and to death. And I talked about that in the paper, how he's already got this kind of mentality about knowing everything he does. And he says even at one point, in the story, that he knew what he was doing was damning his soul, but he keeps on doing it anyway. So he feels like, he's going to put the blame on this or that, but he's just going through what he already knows is going to lead to his death. And the cat that looks like Pluto, I'll let you talk about something then, because I don't want to get into that yet because you might not be ready. But just what did you think about the naming of the cat as Pluto?
Well, I mean, I think it's symbolic, Poe's connection to death and, what's going to happen. Basically, let's put it this way. The cat is going to damn him to hell, basically, because of what he does to the cat, which then leads him, to ending up killing his wife, and then getting found out. So to me, it's symbolizing that, what he does to that cat is basically damning him to hell. So it's the irony that his cat is named that, because that's exactly where his soul is going to go at the end of the day. I mean, that's how I'm kind of interpreting it, but I don't know. Both of these characters, both of these narrators want us to sympathize with them for their situation. In The Telltale Heart, we know that he's going to be arrested and he's talking to somebody. And that's a question I'm going to pose to everybody. And I even said that in Discord. Who is he talking to? Who is he making this confession to or unburdening himself with? Whereas we know in the Black Cat that he is already in jail and he is going to be executed. So that he's probably talking to whoever it is, the lawyer, the person that's going to take him away, whatever, a priest perhaps, but I don't know. I can almost sympathize with the narrator in The Telltale Heart more so than I can with the narrator in the Black Cat. And that's only because of how I feel. I think the mental illness issue as opposed to having an addiction. And also too, I think the narrator in the Black Cat, he talks about his motive being perverseness, the ability to do wrong because you can. Whereas in The Telltale Heart, it's almost like the eye is the motive. That vulture eye is his motive. I wrote that down. He's obsessed with that old man's eye, but I think it's more because of something traumatic that has happened to him. And that's what compels him to do it. And it's once he's done it and he realizes what he has done, whether it's in a lucid moment or whatever, then you almost can feel some sort of empathy for him. Like I said, we don't really have a backstory for him, whereas we have more of that with the narrator in the Black Cat. So, yeah, everything that Poe does is done on purpose. There's nothing accidental.
Yes, that's one of his his elements to his stories and to his poems is something he called the unity of effect, where he talked about the only effective way to write a story is to start it with the ending in mind and to make sure that everything in that story leads the reader to that end. So I think we really see that in both of these stories, because we know from the beginning, like, just let me pull it really quick just to make sure I say the exact quote. But we know at the beginning of the Telltale Heart, right, it opens with the narrator saying, "Why will you say I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them." So we know already that's going to be all about trying to convince us that he's not mad. And we know from the very beginning, too, that he talks about the I, right? And he keeps going on and on with the I. But something I do find interesting is that in the Telltale Heart, the narrator really plots against the old man. So that kind of makes me a little bit less maybe sympathetic with him. I don't know that I'm sympathetic with either one of the narrators, but I feel, because he's like, I'm plotting this out. And he's like, you'll never, you can't imagine how I snuck in the room at midnight, all these nights, 7 nights in a row. And then I finally did it. So that kind of makes me question how, how much sympathy I have for him, because he plotted it and he planned it.
Yeah, but don't you think that's because of his reality? If you're in a different reality where you're seeing something totally different than someone else, I mean, do you think it's because he feels like he has to end this? Otherwise, it's going to actually kill him, possibly? I mean, if a person with mental illness, well, that's my thing. I mean, if a person has mental illness to the point that they're hallucinating, I mean, I even think about that in this story. There's a point in here where Edgar Allan Poe goes to that dinner party, and every person he sees there, he does not see them as a human being. He sees them as something else. He sees one person as the devil. He sees another person as a crook. He sees another person as trying to do something else to him. So you almost wonder, and I'm not trying to defend him.
Right.
It's just, I'm just trying to think about from an aspect of somebody that's dealing with mental illness, is that, and I guess I'll bring it up because that was part of the issue with my mom when she first got her diagnosis with dementia. Part of that is you can have psychosis attached to that. And there were things that my mom was so adamant was happening. And we were like, it is not. Nothing is going to happen if that. And she would keep telling us, you just wait and see. You just wait and see. Y'all are going to be in for it. And we were just like, we don't even know what you're talking about. But in her reality, at that point, that's what she was feeling that was going to happen. You know what I'm saying? So you almost wonder if that was his reality, that, once he discovered, or not discovered, but once he realized whatever it is was happening with that eye, the vulture eye, it's almost like he had to get rid of the vulture eye in order to stop whatever was happening with him. Almost like an obsessive situation at that point. He just became so obsessed. And isn't obsessive compulsive in that mental illness as well, if it's to the degree that you're going to harm somebody?
It is.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking and reaching too far into it.
No. Interpretation is a wonderful thing.
Well, I guess reading it, and I guess with just experiencing, things with my mom recently with that, I it's like, okay, I'm reading it from a different point of, view now. Like I have other experience to bring with it. And so I think that's why it just seems so different to me. And like I said, I'm not excusing it. The fact that he couldn't just kill the old man, I mean, and then bury him, like he had to hack him up and cut him up through this whole entire thing. I mean, it kind of reminded me of Dexter for a second. I'm just like, And was Dexter, was that influenced? Was Dexter, the writers of Dexter, influenced by Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart to get rid of
I
bodies?
think a lot. I think a lot of horror was definitely influenced by Poe. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just something different for me to think about reading it this time around that I never really thought about in all the times that I read it with my students, is that what the motive is and what is the illness, because alcoholism is a disease too, especially if there's an addiction to it, just like mental illness is. But I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with it, but
No,
that's
he
just,
definitely perceives some kind of threat from the eye.
yeah.
Like I said, if it was an overbearing, like the father figure thing, and there's also some scholarly speculation that perhaps the old man had done something to harm this person, even though he says, I didn't have any, basically, I didn't have any beef with the old man. I loved him, but this eye. So he's perceiving some kind of threat from that eye. And
it's a vulture's eye. When you talk
right,
about a vulture, think about vultures. What do vultures do?
right,
They feed off the dead. And
right.
so, that you have that death symbolism again, and it's almost like impending death. If the vulture eye is still looking at him, it's almost like his impending death. So is he going to allow himself to die, or does the old man have to die? You bring that into it, where it's going to be, I'm going to take you out because I don't want to die.
Yes. And I
Kind of
also,
thing.
as you were talking, I kind of started thinking on like the flip side of what I said a few minutes ago about the way that he plotted and planned and snuck in his room. But you could also kind of turn that on its head and say he was waiting to do it. He would go in and think about doing it, but then he wouldn't do it. He'd go in and he'd look at the old man and think about killing him, but then he wouldn't. And then eventually he finally just did. So there's kind of two ways to look at that same situation.
Well, the other thing that you have to think about too is time. Time is something that's different in Telltale Heart. You don't really have the time symbolism in the Black Cat the way you do in
Right.
Telltale Heart. So you almost wonder, is the time that he's telling us, the reader, this story, or whoever it is he's confessing to,
Right.
is the time really what he says it is? Did he really take that many days to go in there and think about this and do this? So that's another thing I think about too, is the time element. Is his version of time really how much time it actually took to do that? I don't know. But also with the eye, one of the things about the eye is I put down the eye is the window to the soul.
Yes.
And so the vulture eye is looking into his soul, perhaps. And then why does the narrator gouge the eye out of the Black Cat? Okay. I say it's because he doesn't want the Black Cat to see his true self.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's what I say.
I completely agree. And one of the things too that happens in that part where he gouges out the cat's eye, the cat up until that point had still been wanting to be around the narrator, even though the narrator says, I started, because of alcoholism. He wants to blame everything on the alcohol, but I think he already had all these plans in mind, and he just tried to use that as an excuse. He was like, oh, it's my addiction, but he already had these things in mind, I think. But one of the things that happens when he does pluck out Pluto's eye is that Pluto then sees the narrator differently too. That's the point where he doesn't want to go around the narrator anymore. And I think for me as a reader, I also saw the narrator differently at that point too. Like maybe until then, I could have had some kind of sympathy or empathy for him. But once he plucked the cat's eye out, I think that readers are like, okay, no, now we see just the way Pluto sees. We see your true self.
Yeah.
I love how Poe does so much with eyes.
Yes, yes, he does. I mean, eyes are something that is very symbolic in a lot of his writing. Let's see what people are saying in here real quick. I don't want to ignore our chat. Uh, Camille is here. Hello, hello. And Alicia was talking about your quotes that you were talking about early on about how he writes a lot about the human condition. And we have reading, derators, and Derek freaking Carr. I agree. Everybody has fear. I fear using the toilet because I'm afraid Skippy Toilet's going to get me. Okay.
I don't know what Skippy Toilet is. I don't think I want to
know. And then Skeleton Key is telling us The Raven's Tale by Cat Winters was a cool, fantastic take on Poe and his dark inspiration. That's good to know. I'll have to check that out. Let's see. Alicia is telling us The Black Cat is far more horrific. I think so. I think so for so many reasons. This is an example to me where a human is a monster. In that sense, I don't know. I have no sympathy whatsoever for the narrator in The Black Cat. I just cannot. And Kelsey's like me. I feel so bad for the cat. Yes, 100%. RC Scott's in the house, maybe still in the house. He's another horror writer, just to let everybody know if you like that. Amy said, I wasn't expecting the animal cruelty in The Black Cat. I was like, OMG. Yeah, it is very graphic, especially because not only does he gouge the eye out of Pluto, but then he proceeds to hang him, and it's like, really? So you can't say that he didn't know what he was doing. I am actually surprised, honestly, that his wife stayed with him. Like, I always wondered about that. Like, how did she?
I think it's an abuse situation. Well, we do know because he says that he has started to abuse his wife. So I feel like she felt, stuck in the situation. She was afraid to leave.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I would have been gone pecan. That's the other thing too. And I felt this when I read Slewfoot. Putting yourself in the feet of, women who live back in the day. You're trying to put yourself in their shoes or whatever, not in their feet. That would be kind of weird. Kind of creepy, actually. But is kind of hard. I think it's kind of hard for us as women today.
Yes.
Because I could not tolerate it. And I think to myself, would I have the same mindset? Would I have been brought up differently to accept it or tolerate it?
I feel like I would have just been in the stocks all the time. I mean, I can't say, like you said, different time periods, but I feel like I would have stayed in trouble. I would have been burned as a witch. I mean, that's just all there is to it. It was a done deal.
So Skeleton Key says that may have to do with Poe figuring out that he had an allergy of sorts to alcohol. Okay. And Jordan is just realizing that he actually hurts the black cat in the story. Yes, I'm sorry, Jordan, to spill those beans. He just flipped out and told on himself in the telltale heart. Yeah, and I think the reason, and I guess that's why I keep thinking, a person with mental illness, like, you're not always in having a hallucination. There's sometimes where you have clarity and you're able to have a conversation and you see. And I do think when the police come and they're questioning him and all that, it may have been a moment where he realizes, I can't take the guilt. I don't think the narrator in The Black Cat suffers from the same guilt that the narrator in The Telltale Heart suffers.
He's much more arrogant.
Yes, I think so. It's crazy to me. And I think it's good that he had the cat in there in the wall and he told on him, the other cat that he gets.
Yes, I love that other cat.
Yes, I do too. I wonder if the second cat in The Black Cat was even real. That's a good point. Yeah. What do you say to that? Because, he does have the white, and the white is in the shape of the rope, isn't it?
It is. I have several things to say about the second cat, or the doppelganger cat. um, I do think it can be argued that this cat is not real, that it is just a manifestation of the narrator's slight guilt, right? Because even in the Black Cat, he himself says that he feels some remorse, but he always says, basically, he says a little remorse just for a few minutes, and then I got over it. But the second cat, something that is really interesting about that cat is the fact that it is black and it's got the white on its chest, because in Celtic folklore, there's a cat called the cat she, and that is spelled Caitsidhe. And the cat she is black with a white spot on its chest. And it is said to steal the souls of humans. And it is also said to be a harbinger of death if you see the cat she. So I think Poe intentionally puts that cat in there, whether it's real or not, to allude to or to reference back to folklore, because we do see him do mythology and folklore a lot, which was something that was common when he was writing during the American Renaissance. We see other writers doing that too, from that time period, like Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville. But with Poe's referencing that cat she, it's really another way of talking about how the narrator has sealed his own fate.
Right.
And there's even one part where the narrator says that the second cat came to steal his soul, but he'd already mentioned before that his soul was damned. So I say that the narrator damned his own self, and he'd already sold his soul, basically. And the second cat is just coming to collect.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of seeing it. I never thought about, I literally interpreted that there was another cat. You know, I never thought about it being whether it was real or not. And of course, I guess if it wasn't, then it is the guilt. It is the guilt, because if you look at what the white on the chest represents, it's the guilt of killing Pluto, you know, and then what does he end up doing? He ends up killing his wife. It's like, what is wrong with you?
But I think the cat was real. I think it can be argued that it wasn't, but I do think it is, because of the way that there's that part too where he says his wife really had taken that liking to the cat, because the cat only had one eye, which was kind of, you know, a weird thing too.
Right. So Alicia also says the eyes are the window to the soul. So maybe the narrator was saying that this man's soul has been corrupted because you can't see through his eye. Poor guy might just have had glaucoma.
Yeah, right.
Lauren liked the father connection in the Telltale Heart. She found that interesting. Hadn't thought of that.
If you want to go deeper into the Freudian stuff, Lauren, let me know, because this scholar, he did go diving in the deep past just the idea of it being a father figure. So it's a bit wild.
Skeleton Key has a friend who named his black cat Pluto. And then I have no room to talk, though. I named my black cat, is it Paganini? Is that how you pronounce it? Do you know who that is, Jennifer?
I don't know who that is, but I need to know now.
Yeah, I need to know that too. I don't know who that is. And Alicia's saying, check on that friend, Skeleton Key. And Linda's here in the chat. Hello, Linda. How are you doing? And it says they didn't have the same resources we have today. Right. That is true. And there are also the images on the walls. First the cat, then the gallows. Yes.
And I love the narrator's ridiculous explanation for that. Man, he does some mental gymnastics trying to explain, you know, oh, someone must have thrown the cat into the wall instead of acknowledging, you know, what's really there before everybody's eyes, right?
Exactly. Because again, his true self, people are going to see his true self again. Amy loves listening to us talk about these stories. I know nothing about mythology. Well, I am not the best when it comes to mythology. I know some myths, but it's like trying to, connect it. I do know a little bit more about the underworld stuff. It says, yes, violinist, composer who was so good that he was rumored to have been a deal with the devil. Oh, that is who Paganini is.
So kind of like a Faustian kind of story. Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'll have to look more into that. It's just incredible to me that, you can have two people who actually express that they love who they kill, actually go through with a murder. I find that fascinating, and I guess because I don't understand it. I don't know how it's possible with my own thinking. I mean,
Right.
I clearly don't have an issue with alcohol. I don't have an addiction to that. And I don't have a mental illness that I know of, so it's just, I don't know. It's just mind boggling to me. And it makes you almost kind of fearful of human beings. I mean, if you think about the history of people who are serial killers, people who, murder people. And I mean, serial killers, to me, a lot of them do it because they're getting off on doing that. It brings them some kind of a release, a high or whatever it is to do that. I don't know. I almost feel like too, and I don't know if this is right or not, but I feel like the narrator in The Black Cat would have continued killing if he wouldn't have gotten caught. I'm not so sure about the one in The Telltale Heart, though.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess I hadn't really pondered it before if they would have kept on doing what they were doing, because they both do get caught, very in a similar way, I would say, because the narrator of The Telltale Heart is just sitting around talking, and then he's like, "What's that? You hear that? I know you hear it." In the floorboards, the beating of his hideous heart, which of course would probably the narrator is hearing his own beating heart, right? His own nerves, dealing with all of that. And in The Black Cat, he's very, I said it a while ago, very arrogant, because he starts showing the police, right? Look at this construction. Isn't this wonderful? And then he takes his cane, like tap, tap, tap on the wall where the dead body is. And the cat has disappeared, right? He didn't know where the cat was after he, asked his wife. If I was the cat, I'd have been straight out of there too. But when he does, get found out, and the cat does its wailing scream, right? But it also talks about how the spectators' eyes were opened. They could see what, who the culprit was, who the murderer was. And then it talks about the second cat's solitary eye of fire was like focused in. So I love, again, how Poe does that with eyes and with fire, and the whole idea of hell and punishment.
Yeah, I think so too. I just, he's so good at coming up with the symbolism and the illusions that are also in there. Like, one of the things for The Telltale Heart I always love is the death, the death watches, hearing that. And that's also timing, and also when your time to die is going to be. And I always think about practical magic with that. If you remember when they hear it, and it's the death beetle or whatever that's coming, that's going to, it's going to take you to hell or wherever it's going to take. It's going to kill you for sure. But I love that illusion, and also love when he talks about the spot, like it, because that to me is more guilt, because he cannot get it off, kind of thing. So I don't know. I always love that when they're able to use that device of illusion in there. Now, of course, you have to be familiar with whatever they're referencing in order to get it. But same thing with naming the cat Pluto, right?
Yes.
Alicia said we need more discussions with the both of you. Oh, thank you very much.
I'm
So,
up for it.
so I also wrote down that both stories show deterioration and deterioration of the human mind, and also has consequences from that. And the deterioration, again, in my mind, is in the Telltale Heart, it's the deterioration from mental illness, whereas it's alcohol that is deteriorating the mind of that. So I just think of that as decay, death. Your mind is dying, just like your soul. It's like your mind and your soul, the body.
Yes.
Death and decay. That's what I kind of think about that with the mind. And that with that deterioration, you've got these consequences, and the consequences are fatal for anybody that's around you having to experience the deterioration of your mind.
Yes, and that certainly fits Poe and the Gothic genre in general. But I really started thinking too, as you were talking about death and decay, the fall of the House of Usher most definitely brings in death and decay. That's my favorite. The Mask of the Red Death had been my favorite Poe story for a long time, but lately I've maybe to do with the TV show, I don't know. I've really gotten back into the fall of the House of Usher. So death, yes, definitely he deals a lot with death and decay.
Yeah, it's all the deterioration. I mean, you see it as so many of his stories, all of his stories, his horror stories, the macabre, and I'm wondering if it's because he felt himself deterioration, or the deterioration of Virginia when she had tuberculosis, seeing all of the death around him. And you wonder how conscious he was of his mother's death. I mean, I know he was 3, but how much was he conscious of what was happening, and how that impacted him on that?
Yes. I think his life is tragic too. The way it ended also was very bizarre circumstances.
Yes.
He'd been kind of wandering around for days, and when they finally found him, he just was very incoherent and wearing a stranger's clothes. And it's rumored that his last words were something like, "Lord, help my poor soul." So,
well, in the Poe Shadow by Matthew Pearl, there is his way of thinking is that maybe Poe was murdered, that maybe something happened, something was given to him, that he had some kind of reaction or whatever. That that's one thing, because there's so much mystery around it. It was such a bizarre situation with his death. He was only 40 years old too, but I do think the alcoholism didn't help his case. I mean, it's sad that because of all of his trauma, he took solace in alcohol, and that, caused more deterioration, I think, in his mind, and his breaks with reality. I don't know. It's very sad to me, because the man was brilliant. He was such a brilliant writer. And I just think we were cheated.
We find that all too often, with writers and creatives, that they do tend to have short lives a lot of times.
Yeah. And I think it's because of how they have to try. I think it's the means of the way that they try to cope with their horrors in their life, or their fears, or what scares them, or whatever the case may be, or that coupled with the traumas that they are dealing with. I mean, a person that suffers from depression, and especially if it's such a deep depression, I'm not talking about like maybe a little seasonal depression. Like I feel like I have seasonal depression during this period of time when it's cold and dark. What is it? Sad seasonal. I know it stands for something like that, but I feel that, you know, I mean, I can be happy and joyful, but I also, if I could get away with it, I think I probably would curl up and hibernate for the
I
4
deal
months.
with that like on a brutal level. I do have major depressive disorder. I was diagnosed in 2017. And so I think that's another reason why I have always felt a kinship to Poe, because I
Mhm.
feel like I was battling depression all of my life, but I did not get a diagnosis until
Until much later.
2017.
Yeah, and it's
And
debilitating.
it is, because there are some days where, I don't feel like doing anything. It's just really hard for me to even get up out of my bed,
Mhm.
to do anything besides just try to stay alive some days, because I will
Right.
also, I'll give a content warning for attempted taking of life, but I did attempt that in 2017.
Oh.
So major depressive disorder is something that, you know, is heavy for me. And so when I'm looking at horror and writers like Poe, a lot of times it's cathartic for me to kind of deal, with some of the things that I deal with, to be
Mhm.
able to kind of process it through the eyes of someone else who deals with it and can write so openly about it.
Mhm. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Jen. I mean, that, for being transparent like that, that's, because I'm sure there are other people out there who are experiencing the same thing, and a lot of times when you talk about that, there's a lot of people out there that don't believe that depression is a real thing, oh, you're not depressed,
Yeah,
you're just like in a little funk, whatever the case may be. But I do know how I feel during the winter months,
yeah,
and some winters it's a lot different than others. I think it's a lot depends on how cold it is. It really does. And without sunshine, I'm a person that needs a lot of sunshine. I have found that out, kind of thing.
hmm,
So I kind of see that a lot of times with, his stories. And I feel like in the Telltale Heart, was this narrator, also suffering from depression? Could it have been what was, in that relationship? Maybe it was something that the old man couldn't give him, that he was searching for. And that brings us back to the father figure
right.
situation, in the Black Cat. I don't think so much. I don't know if depression was any kind of a key for him.
No, I think he was just you know, this bent on, like, it was something that he did say, at the beginning, is how much he'd always loved animals. And
Mhm.
he was so happy to have found a wife who also loved animals. But one of the things he says too is how when he was young, all he had to do was like play with the animals and take care of them. So I think there's a lot to be said there too, of the narrator dealing with married life, dealing with
Mhm.
responsibilities, because now he has other stuff to do. He can't just sit around and play with the animals, and he starts to feel resentful. And I think that
Mhm.
builds up in him till he, just becomes this monster who tries again, like, to blame, oh, I did this because the cat was not paying attention to me. So I
Mhm.
gouged its eye out, right?
Right.
I couldn't take all these responsibilities. So I went to the bar, even though I know I've got a problem. I went there and I indulged, and that's why I've done all these horrible things. But he had already done the horrible
You're
things.
right.
So yeah, with him, I just got, nothing good
I
to say
think
about
I
that
think with him, he wanted the permission.
Yes.
The alcohol gave him the permission, or gave
Yeah.
him the okay. He was really like that, but it was just the fact that, okay, now you have
Right. It was
permission
like
to
a
do this.
scapegoat for him, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Alicia says, I definitely wouldn't ask Poe to pet sit just in case. Oh no. I read an article recently that theorizes that he was caught up in political scheme and forced to drink alcohol.
Hmm.
Wow. That would be an interesting take on that. I know that there were some people that didn't agree with everything he put out there. I mean, he was an editor, he was a critic, he had his own work that he did. I don't know. I just think there were some people that were afraid of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, and the one who wrote his obituary, Rufus Griswold, was actually someone who didn't really care for Poe. So he put a lot of scandalous untruths in Poe's obituary to try to make Poe out to be worse than what he really was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a Rufus Griswold in the TV show The Fall of the House of Usher.
Oh, I'll have to be on the lookout. I've only seen the first 2 episodes, which those were the 2 I slated for the readathon, were those first 2, because Mask of the Red Death is one of my favorites also. And I was really curious, especially after Lauren put out her reaction video. I was really curious to see how well they did with it. And boy, they knocked it out of the park, in my opinion.
Yes. I binge watched it when it first came out. So I wanted to do a rewatch this week, but I didn't get a chance to. But I definitely need to rewatch it to catch everything, because the first time I watch something, I feel like I'm just, like I said, flying through it. I'm trying to just consume it, right? And I want to go back for my rewatch to slow down,
Well, I just know, like, I'll rewatch it probably a couple of times just because I want to see everything, because I know how I am. I'm looking for certain things when I first watch, and you're just in awe of everything that's happening. And then when you go back, then you catch the little things, because there is a part in there where, when Dupin and Roderick are talking, excuse me, you see family members in the shadows. Yeah. My husband totally missed that. I was like, did you see that? And he's like, what? And I'm like, you didn't see that? That was over there standing by Dupin's shoulders. And he's like, no. So I had to rewind it to show him. And I'm like, watch, keep looking. Don't look away. And sure enough, he was like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, it was just trying to catch those little nuances or whatever in there. So I love that. But I don't know. I think there's just so much depth to both the Telltale Heart and the Black Cat. And like you said, I think the reason why they are so similar, we talked about this in the chat yesterday, and that's why we brought up, like, what was going on in his life? What was going on? Because it was January was the Telltale Heart, and I think August was the Black Cat.
Yes.
And so whatever he's dealing with guilt. He's dealing with grief. He's dealing with alcoholism. He's dealing with deterioration, whether it's deterioration because of Virginia's recent diagnosis. She was deteriorating from the tuberculosis. I don't know how it affects the mind, but I know it affects the body. And then just the stress of him having to deal with the stress of that. Another woman that he deeply loves, is dying. So I don't know. So rich.
It is.
So rich. I have read the article Skeleton Key. I wish we knew the mystery. Yeah, I know. I really do. I wish we still had the Poe toaster. The Poe toaster. You had a Poe toaster? That would be interesting. My high school American lit teacher wrote her master's thesis on the smear campaign against Poe. Yeah, I think whenever you have smear campaigns like that, with people who are, to me, a genius, I think you're afraid of them.
Right.
It's fear.
Yeah. And he was a literary critic, and he didn't pull any punches in his criticism. You may know Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, a prolific poet, but Poe skewered him in a critical review, saying that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow plagiarized and that his, work was kind of shallow, basically. So he made some enemies.
Yeah, and I mean, Longfellow is considered somebody who's awesome. You know what I'm saying? In his own right, but I don't know. So who do you think he's confessing to in the Telltale Heart? Who do you think he's confessing to? I always ask my kids this. I was always curious as to who they thought.
If I'm looking at it with the Black Cat, in the Black Cat, he's writing out his confession because he's going to die tomorrow. So I feel like there he's just, confessing, as you said earlier, to his attorney or to his priest, then in thinking about the Telltale Heart, he may be trying to convince also someone, an authority, whether it be a police officer or whether it be some kind of doctor, trying to say, I'm not mad. I'm not mad. I just, I'm telling you what I've been able to do all these things. I'm not mad. What do you think?
Yeah, I've always thought about it being a psychiatrist, that they were evaluating him because, of this crime. The fact that, I'm sure when the policemen get there, they're not thinking really much is going on. I mean, the only reason they're there is because a neighbor makes a complaint.
Right.
And then he starts freaking out, and, then he pulls up the boards, and of course they're going to see this. They find this. So of course, anybody who would see a cut up body under the floorboards of a house would think the person is insane. I always thought of it being a psychiatrist. I just kind of felt like, I guess because, he is mad. But my children, some of my students would say, a doctor, a psychiatrist, a priest, or a pastor. Some even thought a family member, trying to explain themselves to a family member as to why they're in this predicament. A reporter. Some of them have said they thought he was speaking to a reporter, that, they've come to interview him, because at this point we don't really know, how long has he been wherever he is when he's confessing, kind of thing. Some have said a police officer, some have said a judge, because maybe he is also getting ready to be sentenced at that point. Others have thought perhaps it's another cellmate, someone he's in prison with, and he's making that confession to them. Whether it's a cellmate because he's in jail, or whether it's someone in a psychiatric facility, and then others have said maybe he's not talking to anybody at all. Maybe he has someone in mind that he's talking to that we don't see. So it's always clever to me what they would come up with, because I would be like, oh, I never thought about that. I always in my mind thought it was a psychiatrist.
There's a lot of room for interpretation.
Yes, I think so. Whereas I think you're a little more limited with the Black Cat, who he's confessing to. I feel like he's writing out, like you said, he's writing out his confession. We know that he's sentenced to death. And so to me, it's more like a legal, it's like the legal step that he has to do in order to be put to death, like the final step or whatever. So to me, I always just assumed it was either a lawyer or maybe a pastor or something. Whoever your last people are, you're going to, talk to before your actual execution. So if anyone in the comment wants to, in the chat, comment and tell us who did you think, who did you think the narrator in the Telltale Heart was talking to? I'm always curious about that. There was a guy, several guys passed down through the generations who would visit Poe's grave and toast to him. Ah, okay. Poe was spilling some tea.
Yes, he did.
He was. I always thought, with how unreliable the narrator was, he was speaking to whoever would hear him, maybe even to himself. So you see, that's one of the things that, anybody who was around maybe that would listen, because we don't know where he is. We don't know if he's in jail. We don't know if he's in a psychiatric facility we really just don't know. We don't know if he's alone. We don't know if he's got other people. We just don't. Whereas we're not really told that somebody's with him either in the Black Cat, but I feel like somebody is because he's writing out his confession. Am I wrong for thinking that? I don't know.
I feel like that.
Yeah, I don't feel like he's it's just a different circumstance. But you see, Alicia, that's how some of my students were like, is he even talking to a real person? If he could manifest a vulture eye and have an eye, you know, compel him to murder the man, you know, couldn't he like conjure up somebody that's not there? I don't know. The annual visit got to be a big event with people holding vigil along the path, but eventually someone couldn't deal with the mystery and tried to tackle the toaster. Oh, wow. Could you imagine? That's wild. So anyone else in our chat? Anyone else want to say, who do you think? Unless we didn't have a lot of people read The Telltale Heart. Thanks, Alicia, for weighing in what you think. I mean, I don't know. It's a mystery. I mean, I guess maybe Poe wanted it intentionally left up to the interpretation, you know, to that. Well, what about anything else you want to share about The Telltale Heart or the Black Cat?
I don't think so.
Skeleton Key agrees with Alicia, you know, that anyone who was willing to listen,
right.
You know, and maybe he's just talking to himself. Maybe he's trying to convince himself, you know. I just, you know, both things are horrific. I mean, cutting somebody up is pretty horrific. You know, you think about all the blood. I just sometimes wonder too, is how he was able to think so clearly enough to clean everything up in The Telltale Heart. You know, so.
Yeah, that's what makes me question him too, because he seems like he was calculated, plotting and planning. So again, it's kind of like that circle. You could keep going, you know, and thinking about it in different ways.
Yeah, also too, I wonder if he even thought about how he was going to dispose of the body. You know, I think about that now. Like, I wonder, like, he wanted to just get rid of, he had to kill the man in order to have the eye go dark so that it wasn't looking at him anymore. But I wonder when he started this thinking, if he ever really thought about how he was going to get rid of the body.
I don't think he did till the moment he did it. Yeah.
It happened.
He just wanted to get rid of the eye. And then he's like, oh, wait, there's all these other body parts. I got, you know.
Yeah. Whew. I don't know. Somehow I just think it would have been better for him to drag him out somewhere. I mean, he could have done it under cover of night, right?
Yes. Because he killed him around midnight, right? Because we know he keeps talking all throughout midnight.
Right.
And it's a lot of work to pull up some floorboards. I'm just saying.
Well, it's a lot of work, I would think, to cut somebody up.
That
and then you go back and you have to clean it all up. So, like,
that would not be my choice to do.
No.
I wouldn't do it that way.
No.
Not that I plan to do that to anybody.
No, yes. I
would not implicate myself.
Right. Skeleton Key said he probably wasn't nearly as successful as he imagined himself to be. Oh, well, that is a good point. I never thought about that either. I never thought about that. I wonder if the policeman, I mean, the way in his mind, the policemen don't realize that he's done anything wrong. I never, ever considered that. How about you? Did you ever consider that he was really neat and tidy and had everything?
I always just thought that he had done a good enough job because and he's unreliable too. But, he says that he's just kind of sitting around having this conversation with the police. Like they're just still hanging around, after they say, okay, basically they've kind of cleared him. or at least that's what the narrator says. And they're just having this conversation. And then suddenly the heart starts, he hears the heart or perceives that he hears the heart. But then you have to wonder if the police are actually still hanging around because they don't really believe him and they're kind of waiting on him to slip up. So maybe he was not as successful at hiding as he thought.
Yeah. So much good stuff. Alicia's saying we didn't hear anything. He says they don't suspect him, but he's delusional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jen said, he's unreliable. So how can we really know what transpired there? What actually happened with that? Well, that's all I have. Really, I'm looking at my notes of what I have here. I touched on everything I wanted to say. And you seem like you touched on everything you wanted to say. You brought a lot of wonderful information to this chat. I really appreciate it. You know your stuff. I can tell. I knew you knew your stuff coming in, but you do know your
stuff.
A
little rambly about Poe, so I hope I didn't ramble too much. And I still get nervous on live, so I probably stumble, like full, disclosure here. I told Kat before the show started, for some reason, I was really, really nervous. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. And I mean, I teach students online, like during the week, middle and high school students, and they're certainly more likely to be difficult than any of you are, but I was very nervous.
Yeah, I told her there was nothing to be nervous about. Alicia says, always thought the police really didn't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always kind of felt like if he confessed to it, but again, like Skeleton Key said, he's delusional. Maybe he said that, Thank you, Kelsey. I appreciate you saying that. We appreciate you being here. Thanks for the great discussion. Thank you also, Skeleton Key, for being here. Thank you, Alicia. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Kelsey, again for giving Jen a happiness boost because, like I said, she was a little bit nervous, and Alicia thinks she killed it. I am going to plug Jen's channel because she has some Poe videos out. She has some recommendations, and she also did a vlog for the first 3 days, which I still need to watch that one myself.
And so the second one I'm going to try to get up. I don't know if I'll get it up tomorrow, but sometime this weekend, my days 4 through 7 will go up.
Yeah, so please take a look. And if you are not subscribed to Jen's channel, I encourage you to please subscribe. Take a look and subscribe. She's got wonderful content. And thank you, Jessica, for being here as well. We really do appreciate y'all hanging with us. I enjoyed our discussion. I enjoyed the Nevermore Readathon. I think it's something I would love to bring back for next January because I love Edgar Allan Poe. And, if there's anything else you have to say before we close, Jen?
Thank you for a perfectly wonderful time, Kat.
I love it. I love it. So on that note, we're going to tell y'all good night. Have a perfect night.
Yes.
And thanks everyone for participating in the Nevermore Readathon and joining us this evening. Y'all stay amazing and be adventurous. Bye. Everybody.